Hey, you're listening to the Fatboy Show on RX Radio, and I am Fatboy here, continuing the conversation with our special guest today, Mr. Wotsomu Wanda, economist and friend of the show. Today, he's here to talk to us about the World Bank and how they've said they're no longer going to extend to us loans, or at least no new loans, in the face of the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, a law that was assented to by the president that imposes penalties on people that are engaged in LGBT activity, LGBT promotion, whatever that means, recruitment and so forth. You know the story. So now that the World Bank has pronounced itself on this, and Uganda is going to enter into a period of financial and economic uncertainty, my question to you, Wotsomu, is how do we respond? Already, the Ministry of Finance is saying they're going to have to rewrite the budget. They're going to have to do reallocations. Isn't that bad?
Ultimately, I think we picked the wrong moment to try to prove a point over our independent thoughts. I think that the confluence of factors that are all aligning, we really jumped in the middle of what is becoming some kind of perfect storm. And ultimately, we are to blame for that. Because you can notice after the COVID and the lockdown that happened, and then followed by the Ukrainian-Russian war, this is purely geopolitical and bringing a lot of pressures. We have had a great deal of inflation in the Western world, where interest rates have risen to almost to the same extent, recreating factors that brought about structure adjustment program. In the 80s, late 80s, Volcker increased interest rates in the US. The rest of the world choked and almost came to a standstill, and structure adjustment was implemented across the board. Now we are going through a similar kind of economic turmoil of a sort, with inflation high in the West. And you notice that most of the pressures, especially ideas of geopolitical, China and BRICS, then decide that there is an idea of forming an institution to emulate the World Bank and IMF. Ultimately, with all this happening around the same time, it would be unnecessary, or you will be putting yourself in the firing line to try to poke a finger at the World Bank because of the sensitivities that have developed all around.
Well, we have known for a longest time that our donors would not be happy with our decision to pass this bill. I mean, they had expressed their disdain for it right from the beginning of the process.
And this was the second take on it.
Yes, and there have been several efforts to lobby the president, lobby politicians, by the donors and their representatives here to try to not get the bill passed, which eventually it was passed. Then the president was also requested to not assent to it. I mean, you saw the drama.
Yeah, that's true.
Eventually he did. So how can we act surprised that they've actually decided to, at least the World Bank, and earlier you were talking about how they exert so much influence that when they pull back, it could have a ripple effect. So we don't know who else is going to be compelled to similarly withdraw. So I guess... I guess my question is, we saw this coming.
Yes.
Why are we surprised?
I think we kind of are misreading what the new development bank of the BRICS basically entails.
BRICS?
Yes. Because many assume it will take on the role of the World Bank and IMF, and we will just roll in and become members, and all our funding, all taps will be open, and then we will be back to that won't happen. Why? Because the World Bank is so embedded in almost all other countries, and the dollar supply is so overwhelming through numerous institutions. It's not like it's just the World Bank. There are numerous institutions whose job or whose system flow is basically dollars. So, and they are multilateral institutions, because what we have to internalize is that when you're going to get loans from this particular new institution, ultimately, in which denomination are we getting loans? Are you getting yuan to come and implement projects here in Uganda? Will you?
Where are you going to take your yuan to buy things?
And that's.
Are you going to pay contractors in yuan?
Unless you're going directly to China, it's almost impossible for you to get your funding from even China today. All the lending it has done across the world, I think the overwhelmingly is in dollar terms. No one borrows from China and then gets yuan. They are basically dollar.
Although I heard that, was it Saudi Arabia that was accepting yuan to buy oil?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia and the US are partners who once in a while go at, when you have a married couple getting into a fight and you go into the middle.
They step out of the marriage.
And you think that they are breaking up. No, they are not. Saudi Arabia was just angry that the US was making overreaches to Iran.
Okay, so are you saying... It almost sounds like you're saying there was some short-sightedness on the part of our politicians who believed that there would be easy alternatives to be found.
They are not reading this very well because
but you can't. I can't believe they wouldn't know this. I mean, Museveni is no fool. Certainly, he has to know. I'm sure he has. One eye is looking at BRICS, but a part of him must be going, let's first see how things go. We're not yet sure.
The old man is basically aware of the game, and I get the feeling ultimately this last time it was passed, signed, and we got to technical reasons why it was repealed.
So I look at two scenarios here. Either number one, are they hoping to negotiate their way out of this? That's number one. Or number two, and many have alleged that it has been the expectation of this government, and in particular this president, that this law will likely get challenged in a constitutional court and get repealed, just like the first one. And, when legal experts reviewed many of the provisions of the new bill, a lot of people saw such obvious problems that many were surprised that it could even be assented to, because there are so many areas that could very easily be challenged in court, rendering the bill essentially worthless. And so if that happens, and already we know that people have petitioned for this law to be scrapped. If it is scrapped, would that then solve the problem, and also at the same time allow the president to save face? Meaning, well, if the law is scrapped, surely the World Bank has nothing to complain about. And if it is scrapped in court, the president can still enjoy the benefit of being seen as the champion of traditional or anti-gay sentiments. So it would seem like a win-win. So could the issue maybe be that things happened faster than they had hoped?
Yeah, I think basically that could be the issue. But ultimately, as we go through all those maneuvers, what still sits with us is the overwhelming power and overwhelming reach of the World Bank and these particular institutions. And the one thing they succeeded in doing, especially to make us embedded to them, was the structure adjustment. Because what that entailed was to restructure what had been developing in many of our economies towards some semblance of localized independence. And one of the things was that we were refocusing a lot of our economies towards local production, especially for local consumption. Whatever percentage you grow of that particular aspect of your economies, you generate a certain level of independence and allow development that leads to transformation into a more developed economy. But what we were taken back to with structure adjustment is a reliance on the drive of the economy then becomes getting dollars into the economy through exports or donor funding. Those are the two aspects that drive the economy. We institute all production towards exports rather than consumption. That you are forced into the direction of producing things that you don't consume or don't need. And actually, the basic structure of the economy.
And I think that's a very good point. And for all the chest thumping African leaders are doing about how, well, we have gold, we have diamonds, we have oil, we have zinc, we have magnesium. The other part they don't say is there is no demand for those things in Africa.
Locally.
So unless we have access to the Western markets and the Western markets are willing to pay for these commodities, essentially we stay poor. And so I absolutely see no reason to imagine that in some way we are so superior, or at least we have some sort of leverage in these conversations, because as long as they keep their markets closed, we are at their mercy. We're not going to sell coffee to each other. No,
we are not consuming coffee.
And neither are we consuming all that much of it, or tea, or cotton, or everything else. So we are essentially beholden to these foreign markets. And, to your point, that therefore makes us, to a very large extent, dependent on dollars coming in from outside to really sustain our economies. Now, I don't know, does the government have any other choice? Because even if the goal would be to boost local consumption, would you still not need an infusion of dollars from outside?
Yeah, but the difference would be the structuring that would allow. Because if you are focused on local consumption, one thing that was killed off was local banking. That would allow local funding for local consumption, or local production for local consumption.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, so when you have what you have as funding that is externalized, and almost all the funding you get, or when we talk of World Bank, then IFC as for the private sector, and you'll notice that almost all big projects that we ever embark on have to have an aspect of this IFC, and the rest is foreign funding. We are almost... Now we have what we consider to be our local pipeline that we need to put up, or refinery for that matter. And to the extent that it's to be in place, to be instituted and built, it will also have to almost like 100% would have to be foreign funding. And basically you're thinking.
My understanding is that's been the plan. Isn't Total Energies the ones coming in with it?
Exactly.
Okay, so in the immediate aftermath, what do you see happening to our economy? There were stories about how the shilling was collapsing. I think within 24 hours it had lost 130 shillings to the dollar. So what does this mean? I mean, was that just a coincidence? Is it a hiccup that you can expect in the short term that can stabilize?
And that's, I think, because what happened with this particular statement is that the World Bank has not done anything yet other than release the statement. And if our shilling is going to react on a statement, which is basically a statement, it will tell you that on the front of the local economy, the dollar flows and the rest that have already been planned are moving on normally, and yet we are already feeling the shocks. Should we go to the next step where they start the process of implementing, especially when we go into budgetary planning and the rest of it, and there is no funding from the World Bank, especially in the projects they focus on, and then you find that the private sector funding also disappears, and then you find the rest that may follow. We really don't want to get there. That's why I don't know whether we are firmly wedded to this law, and we are so jingoistic at this moment that come what may, we are driving.
We're willing to die on this hill.
Exactly.
but
So,
are you asking people to trade their morals and values and culture in exchange for funding?
no, ultimately,
That's what it sounds like you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. You would be wrong, but is that what you're saying?
I think we mix up a lot of things and drive ourselves in. Ultimately, what we as a country have our values, and those values are focused on what the majority of us basically believe in and can work with. Most of Ugandans that you meet and deal with don't have any homosexuality idea floating around them. There is no active participation that you really think is going on, other than in private spaces that many of us never reach or never get to know. Now, to the extent that we don't see what's going on, I don't see why we get bothered with what is happening in people's private spaces. To the extent that they will want to march down our streets the rest anyway. Our
Those
politicians don't
pride
do
parades.
that anyway. Yes, our public spaces are so managed that it won't happen anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think we already are instituted in a way that would not allow certain aspects of what we fear are these particular social deformities.
But I guess
in our space.
It was probably the result of a calculation or a gamble. The president made a political gamble. He probably saw the value of getting behind a bill like this because it allows them to deflect any criticism about corruption or anything else that people don't like. It's an easy red herring distraction for the masses. And so I think the opportunity was too good to ignore. And so they rode the wave, hoping that it wouldn't cause them too much of a retaliation from the West, in which case this time it seems to have. And the calculation could still be, like I said, in the event that the bill gets scrapped, they still are able to benefit from the political capital gained from championing the bill.
Yes.
While at the same time, now with the bill gone, it's back to business as usual, right? The donors keep giving us money like they always have. And maybe that's how this story is supposed to end.
And that's, to me, we know with the ESGs, it's a wider array of items that have to be dealt with. And I noticed when the PSST, the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Finance, returned from the World Bank, basically, he was talking of the new areas of funding that the World Bank is going to focus on and the rest of the Bretton Woods institutions. And basically, the outline of what he talked of were basically ESGs, the environmental related funding, that the rest of the funding is basically petering out, disappearing. And it seems the new focus is going to be in areas where we as a country have to focus on basically the ESGs. So that being what it entails, I think it's pretty obvious that we don't have the space or the bandwidth to start going down the line of all the rest of the things that are unnecessary because our developmental needs are overwhelming.
So you're saying essentially your appeal is to Ugandans is, come on guys, just move on from this. There are other issues to deal with. Don't mind what people are doing.
Yeah, let's create
their
jobs.
Privacy. Let's create. I'm certainly in support of that sentiment, and I think even those who claim to feel very strongly about this, really at the end of the day, I feel like it's performative. The outrage is performative. They want to be seen to be on the right side of the issue, but deep down they probably couldn't care less.
That's very true.
But so my last question would be, why was Uganda singled out? There are other countries that have equally harsh laws. Ghana has one that might get passed anytime soon. But again, there are many parts of the world where the laws are worse. Why was Uganda singled out? Is it by accident?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think we jumped into the midst of a storm, and this storm is brewing and it's in the background.
So it became the perfect
we became a
subject.
Exactly. And Ghana, I think, may be in a worse situation because of what has happened previously. Its budgetary issues are mounting, and its currency has collapsed. I think it's the worst performing currency in the last year. And a lot of turmoil is coming within its economic space, all generated by these particular interest rates the US has been pushing up. It has created a lot of turmoil. When you see South Africa, who the currency coming from around 12 to 18 over this particular period of time, and this is all because of the interest rates rising. And you notice Ramaphosa is up and down, and he's not a happy man at all. The same thing is happening with China. China is going through a difficult period, and a lot of it arises from the same structuring of the US withdrawing liquidity and interest rates going up. So when you notice all these pressures that are mounting all around, and people saying enough of this, because every time the US does this, the rest of the economy suffer, and they are all calling for a new framework. And if you notice, the Kenyan president was saying the same thing. We need a new framework, financial framework. When you notice now, the same thing is happening with us. I think then utilizing this law as a way to poke this Bretton Woods was first of all unnecessary, but it landed at the wrong time. Because if it was a tactical move, I think we've reached a stage where probably they're on the table discussing. That is one thing we hope for.
Right.
Probably discussing, because even the statement from the World Bank was more of a warning. And then at the same time, you notice there was a statement from the State Department through the Ugandan mission, basically broadcast it, and it was the U.S. embassy here
about the Uganda's investment climate.
Exactly. So you notice these things are being aligned.
There's coordination.
There is a discussion going on. And of
They're
course,
trying to bury us.
I hope it's not buried as such. It's more of, please don't go there, or careful, or step back a little on some areas. And then you can see there's a perfect storm forming in West Africa. And it's around similar issues. And it's so, with all these developments that are kind of going up, we may want to be outspoken and be the ones shouting from the pulpits, representing ideas of a particular nature. That can be satisfying in its own way, but we should always be aware of the general price or the general movements that are occurring around us, that we don't find ourselves in a squeeze in which we are not the biggest participants. We just become victims instead.
Final question. Final question. Do you think it's significant that the current U.S. administration's policies beliefs are aligned with a lot of these ideas being imposed on us by the World Bank? So, for example, under a Trump presidency, would the World Bank have been making such overtures, and would Trump have allowed it? Is this in some way connected to, the Joe Biden's or the Democratic Party's ideological platform? Is it all intertwined, do you think?
That's a very interesting question, because ultimately, if it's the Trump presidency in power, you will find that the people who have pushed us to have this particular law are basically from the US. The Christian right movement is the one that has been behind this very law. It's not like they just
provided the ideological underpinnings for this legislation.
It did, and they even give the basic arguments for it.
I wouldn't think they gave I wouldn't think they suggested the penalties, but I think they fueled the concerns about promotion of homosexuality, recruitment. These are ideas that are widely circulating in conservative circles. So it would not surprise me if this is what was falling into the ears of our legislators.
That's very true.
But so that said, so you're saying that essentially we are a victim of a cultural proxy war?
It's a US culture war that we are coming in the midst of, and doesn't
so
necessarily
the conservative evangelicals spreading their propaganda here, and then the US liberals
spreading their own propaganda here, and then
but
we find
the advantage that the liberals have is that they have the tools of the state and the institutions, and I think even surveys that have been carried out do show that State Department is overwhelmingly Democrat. Like Washington, essentially, nearly all of it is proportionally Democrat. So there are a lot of people embedded in the United States Department and elsewhere that are politically aligned with many of these ideas. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. When I look at the U.S. government Twitter posts, I feel like I'm looking at CNN or MSNBC.
Liberal
world views,
Yeah, that's true.
So that is just quite interesting. But wow, I think we'll have to wait and see how things unfold, and if indeed there may be discussions or a negotiation or some sort of middle ground that can be reached in which things can continue. But for now, I can tell you everyone's in a panic in the private sector. I am worried because I do know that this is going to impact the spending habits of the business community.
Yes.
If you want to go to MTN to get adverts or something, they're going to tell you, you see, now the World Bank, everyone's going to be singing the same song.
Yes.
And so in the private sector, we have a lot to worry about, I think.
That's very true.
But what's your final outlook for the country? Do you think things will be okay?
I think we are on what you would call standstill in many areas. We have the new permanent secretary who has implemented what he considers realignment of the economy. And some of the ideas, because to me he seems to be the first permanent secretary in a long time who is not associated with the World Bank, and he could have done a mini purge of some of the members of historical in the line.
Sure.
There is no way he would come and implement some of the ideas because some of them don't align with what the World Bank was basically had put in place or what had been running for the last 20 or so years.
And also Muhakanizi died. And I know he was very much involved in a lot of...
And Mutebile.
And Mutebile too.
And we are not replacing yet.
Wow, interesting.
So there has to be reasons. There's a waiting game going on.
Right.
Of course, the president has the right to take his time and make reconsiderations, but you can notice there are particular changes within these particular institutions, and some of them may not be fully aligned with what the World Bank thinks at a technical front, before we even talk of the ESGs and this particular one that has been utilized as a weapon against us.
Woo. Well, this discussion is not going to end here. And in case you want to find out more about this thing called ESG that we've been talking about, you can go to the RX Radio podcast archive. You can access it through the website or the RX Radio app. Just do a search for ESG and you'll find previous conversations that I've had with Wotsomu Wanda on this topic. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the videos on YouTube also, where we go into some length on this very interesting topic. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Wotsomu Wanda. Always a pleasure to hang out with you and to converse with you about these very interesting issues to do with economics and geopolitics.
I'm very, very glad to be here so that we appreciate some of the things better.
And where can people find you?
Yeah, Wotsomu Wanda on Twitter, Wotsomu Wanda on Facebook, and TikTok as well.
All right, you heard. Do keep listening to your number one station, RX Radio.